Hi, Dan. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. Now, you've written one book so far called Post Meridium, and we're going to get to that as soon as we can. But I also understand you have a podcast that you're a host of.
A few, but I think the one you might be referencing is actually as a minor marketing ploy, or it's hard to sell a book, or it's hard to get people to buy a book, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
for a certain portion, the main body of Post Meridium, I have done podcasting, and so I turned it into a free podcast audiobook.
Hmm.
Um, I'm more interested in people experiencing the story necessarily than making money with it, because I knew that that was virtually impossible anyway. So there's some parts of the book that are omitted from the audiobook version. So if people are tantalized enough by what they hear, they can buy the book to get the rest of the story. But so I'm selling the book, and I essentially turned it into an audiobook podcast that you can listen to for free as
Yeah.
well.
Good. Yeah. Yes. That sounds like a very good idea. But before we get to your book, I'd like to know a little bit more about you and who you are and how you got to the point where you wrote this book and the reason for writing it.
I have a little bit of a meandering story, but essentially, and I think that I speak the same language on this. So my education is in film, video, and film production. Um, and so when I was 23 or 24, I moved to Los Angeles to be a screenwriter. I now live in Florida, so that didn't pan out, which is a common story. But I also suffer from fairly severe major depressive disorder. And during my time in Los Angeles, I was, as the story goes, was involved in a little bit of excess drinking, etc., and discontinued my medication. And I was sort of impoverished. I wasn't involved in a good scene. And when that's going on and you discontinue your medication, when you suffer from a psychiatric disorder, things get very bad very quickly. And so within about 7 months, my depression was out of control to the point where I became psychotic, and I checked myself into a psychiatric hospital for 72 hours. I was suicidal, or having suicidal thoughts. And that forms the backbone of the story of Post Meridium. So it's a memoir of what it's like to be in that position, and poor and young in Los Angeles all at the same time.
Mm, wow.
Um, Yeah, but I'm a professional technical writer. I'm a professional writer in general. I've done screenwriting. I've done various podcasts, as you mentioned, and this is a story that I began essentially right after I got out of the hospital. Um, with my initial aim was to have it published as a feature in something like the Los Angeles Weekly or the LA Weekly, and it quickly grew to 50, 60,000 words, and then eventually over 80, which is too long for any magazine. And so this actually occurred in 2009, and I just published it this year. So I've been tinkering with this for almost 15 years, trying to figure out, it's a document. Everything in the book happened, but I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what kind of story I wanted to tell. So the distance between the person I was when I started writing it and today, I started writing it when I was 20, 25, 26, and now I'm 40. So the perspective is very different. But since Los Angeles, I've moved to Phoenix. I lived in Colorado for a while, back to Florida, Florida again. Um, so yeah, meandering. But the theme that runs through my biography is writing in one form or another. This just happens to be my first book.
Hmm. Okay. Let me pull up what I saw here. There's an interesting word you use. All right, there it is. You call it an unreliable memoir. How does that work?
Um, I would say that it is true, but not accurate. Um, it's the story of what happened to me as documented or as recorded by a brain that is not functioning properly. So I do stand by it from the perspective of it's how I understood things to be happening. That doesn't necessarily mean that they happened that way. My memory is a little fractured from that perspective. So I wanted to make it clear, even in the subtitle, I'm not going to guarantee that all of the things I talk about happened exactly that way. Um, but the backbone of it is true, and I have some documentation, some things I can rely on, and some secondhand accounts. But it's a kind of a common trope in fiction to have an unreliable narrator to massage the plot, to tell it from their perspective, and then the question becomes, to what extent are they trying to clean up their own side of things? And I think that I did that too, a little bit. I think that we all do, especially if you're the hero of your own story.
Yeah.
You might make yourself look a little bit better than you did at the time. I'm sure I did that. But because there's such a distance in time between starting writing it and the events and when I actually published it, I can't remember necessarily if my memory is of the last time I read it or if what's in my head is actually what I remember from the time. It gets a little lost. So I think it's unreliable from a number of different perspectives. But like I said, I consider it true, but not accurate.
Okay. Well, clearly, when you have a dynamic experience such as you've had, to write it down seems very tempting, and you went ahead and wrote down your memoir, unreliable or otherwise. Now, who is this book geared towards?
I think that the only person that I had in mind while writing it was myself. I wanted to remember these things. Um, I think it would be for anybody who has a mental health issue who can relate to it, but I also think it's for the way that I sort of think about it is I was diagnosed first with major depressive disorder when I was 14, and that would have been in 1997. And the discussions about mental health weren't nearly as ubiquitous as they are now. I didn't even know what was happening to me. I remember um, feeling extremely daunted by the idea of being in high school for 4 years. That seemed impossible to me. I remember crying myself to sleep at night if I slept at all. I had never heard the word depression. And I actually remember that I sort of self diagnosed what was going on with me because of a PSA that I saw late night on MTV. That's how little it was talked about. Now, with the advent of social media and obviously the internet is more accessible, I don't know that a 14-year-old would necessarily have that same experience. So they would spend months trying to figure out even what was happening inside their own brain. Um, so I think the timing is better and it's easier to have that discussion. I also want people to see it doesn't necessarily make things easier or better, but the way that I cope is with humor. And no matter how dire your situation is, if you could take a step back and look at it, if it wasn't happening to you, it's a little absurd and it might be sort of funny. And that's the way that I cope. So I suppose it's also for people maybe to help eliminate the stigma a little bit around mental health. We're not different, and sometimes it's funny. And so all of the parts of it that were funny, even in the most harrowing moments, I tried to record. Um, and so I think almost any, I mean, of course, I'm the author and I'm trying to sell books, so this would be a convenient thing for me to say, but my general opinion is that almost anyone who read it would get something out of it, whether they have intimate knowledge of mental health or not, to see how one person copes. And it's not intended to be a tearjerker where I'm dragging you through the experience, kicking and screaming and saying, "Oh my God, how horrible is this?" It's more just an example of how I cope, which is to step aside of what's actually happening and say, "God, if you were anybody else, this might be a little funny." It's not funny when it's happening to you, but it might be funny
Yeah.
and absurd when it's happening to somebody else.
Right. Now, when it was happening to you and you were in there for 72 hours, What was that really like for you?
It was not funny. Um, it was a Los Angeles County psychiatric hospital. So I've never been arrested. It's probably as close as I'll ever get to jail because the majority of the people inside with me were not there. I was there by choice and I was the exception. It was one huge room with a bunch of hospital beds. The majority of the people there came in handcuffs. So most of them were arrested and then were so obviously psychiatrically disturbed in some way that instead of taking them to jail, or maybe that was a competency thing, I don't know, but I would say that there were only a few of us who were there by choice. It was a very intense experience, the closest I've ever come to jail, the closest I ever want to come to jail, and it was frightening. So I think that that's another thing to point out is that these things are funny to me in retrospect, but it was I kind of talk about in the book that I checked into that psychiatric hospital because I was afraid, or no, I checked into that psychiatric hospital because I wanted to die. And then almost as soon as once you tell them that, you admit to that, and you sign the paperwork, it's out of your hands and they're going to let you go when they're ready to let you go. There is no saying, oh, I made a mistake. I'd like to leave now. Um, and so I went there because I wanted to die. And then I felt desperate to leave because I was afraid I actually might. So
Mm-hmm.
pretty much as soon as the door locked behind me, my skin was crawling and I thought, I might die here. I might actually die here. So it was extremely intense. And I think it's the closest I will ever get when they finally let me go to experiencing what someone who's been in prisons would feel like, where you feel like you're reborn. Everything is novel. The sun in the sky, a breeze on your face, or for me, particularly that first cigarette after having no nicotine forcibly for 72 hours. So, um, it was a very, very intense experience, if you're ever in LA, I do not recommend that. Go see the Hollywood sign or something.
Mm-hmm. I remember reading your description of the book, and somewhere in there you were talking about walking down the streets and seeing some of the homeless people and some of the darker side of LA. What was that like for you?
It was interesting. LA, for me, it papers over the cracks. The the filmmaking culture is sort of pervasive. You depending on what street you turn down, but it's a it's a town where people live in, but it's also a tourist town, and the make believe is there. It sort of infects you to the point where everything sort of looks like a prop or some sort of a set piece, and so it feels less real. It has an air of sort of a dreamlike quality, but certainly there's an enormous homeless population, and um, you don't have to turn down too many side streets away from Sunset or Hollywood Boulevard. You're looking at the stars on the Walk of Fame, and then take two lefts, and then there's like a shanty town
Mm.
with homeless people and drug addicts. So um, it's interesting, especially when you're mentally ill and impoverished, such as I was. I mean, I had an apartment, but I shared a one bedroom apartment with someone, and I just slept in the living room. I think it was also sort of a constant reminder that I'm mentally ill. I'm not taking care of my mental illness, and I'm poor. I'm not that many steps from these people. If I develop a drug habit or something, that's me with very few steps in between. Um, and I think more than most cities, the fine line between the luxurious lifestyle that many people lead and just living on the streets is they butt right up against each other in Los Angeles.
Mm. Did you have any success at all in what you went to LA for in the first place? Did you experience some sort of success of any sort?
I had a limited amount of success. My goal in moving there was to be a professional screenwriter, and I got paid to write a few screenplays, which is sort of the dictionary definition. I never made much money, but because of the relationships I formed and the work that I did manage to get into some rooms and pitch some ideas. I got more intimately familiar with that business, and the way that it operates. And I had there's a moment where you look at yourself in the mirror and ask, is this really what I want to do with my life? Especially here. And I think after that 2 years that I spent there, I realized I don't think so. I don't think this is for me. But I did have limited success. I got paid to write, which was the whole
Some people
point.
can't even, some people can't even do that. So I guess I was all right. Did you ever think, had I stayed longer and really, worked at it, I could have succeeded, or you came to this conclusion that absolutely it's not for you and you went back to Florida?
I ran out of money completely, so I didn't really have a choice. I think if I had stayed, gotten a little bit healthier, mental health wise, and had a higher level of motivation, I think I probably would have been successful to some level. Right before I left, I was getting my foot in the door to write on some. I submitted a couple spec scripts to sitcoms that were airing at the time, some of which had positive reception. I think I was on my way to getting an agent, which is really the next big step. Um, so I think that probably I would have been successful in some way if I had stayed another year. I probably would have progressed some, but I don't really regret it. I don't think I was right for that moment. And I think you need to be to dedicate yourself to it. So um, I'm of two minds, but I think I made the right decision, and it borders on the only decision for the time.
Okay.
I don't think I had another choice.
The title of your book, Post Meridium, I think we all know what that means, but you chose that as a title. What does it mean to you as a title for your book?
I think it's supposed to be evocative of my kind of natural circadian rhythm is flipped. I am more alive, awake, and creative at night than most people. And and that's sort of a pervasive thing throughout the book, or a pervasive theme throughout the book, is that so many of the scenes take place at night. During that period, especially, I was sleeping all day and up all night, and it's an interesting thing to be when you're sort of up until the sun rises. You're existing in a sort of a space and time that most people don't inhabit. It's a lot quieter. For me, it's easier to think. I'm cheating a little bit because actually those, after midnight, it becomes anti-meridium again. But it's just supposed to be evocative of sort of living your life after the sun goes down as opposed to as it's rising.
I know what that's like. Been a
Yeah.
musician all my life, so
Yeah.
I've lived that life too. Not so much anymore, but yeah, interesting. Now, when you did get out of the hospital, did you have any success after that, or did you come straight home back to Florida?
It was about another year before I ended up going back to Florida. I had a couple of writing jobs, but no great success. My roommate ended up leaving before I did, and then I took on the full rent. And then, even though I got healthy, I was on medication, I was seeing a therapist. I would say over that year, things got progressively more difficult financially, emotionally. Um, so things got better from one perspective, but I think pretty much from the time that I went into the hospital, I knew, or I thought at least, that this experiment didn't work. I think that the city might be too hard on me.
Mhm. How are you doing right now?
So, okay. Life is complicated, certainly. A bunch of things that I won't get into, but I mean, I'm relatively stable. I'm employed. Obviously, I released a book, it's doing well for a first-time independent author. But it's like I said, it's not easy to get people to read a book, even for free necessarily, because there's so many requests. But the reception that I've gotten has been very positive. People seem to be taking from the book what I intended, and are refreshed that it's not intended to completely drag you over the coals. And I'm not really trying to live that experience like an open wound. It's, for the most part, is supposed to be sort of darkly humorous. And so it's been a fairly positive experience. As daunting, it's a difficult thing to self-publish. It's a lot of work beyond writing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a marketing team or anything. It's literally just me. But I don't know. It's an interesting experience. I wasn't necessarily positive that I would ever publish Post Meridium. It just
Mm-hmm.
sort of sat on my shelf for a very long time. And now that it's out there, it sort of feels out of my hands.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be what it is.
Yeah, I see that you credit an illustrator in your Amazon page. How was that? What was that like?
That was she's a very talented sort of sketch artist, Caitlin Crawford, and I basically I was trying to think of an image that would evoke something just at first glance, and the idea of a phrenology head with sort of like a clock erupting out of the back of a phrenology head occurred to me. And she was very good. I basically sent her two images of kind of a broken clock and a phrenology head and said, do something. And she did, yeah, like almost exactly that, where the clock is literally causing the phrenology head to explode. And it was better than I had hoped.
Good.
She did an original pencil sketch, just black and white, and then I took that and flipped it and colored it and put it on that Polaroid on the cover of the book. But that was very enjoyable. I mean, I thought honestly it would be like, I've worked with illustrators in the past, and some of my work I work with graphic designers, and that's an iterative process for the most part. You give them a concept, and then you spend the next month going back and forth because you might not be speaking the same language. But with her, she tried it once, and I said, not quite, but so close. And I gave her a few notes, and the second sketch is the one that you see on the cover of the book. It didn't take any time at all.
You said you had some success. Besides what we're doing here today, what else have you done to promote this book?
I am not a social media person. I rather despise social media, actually. But when Instagram launched Threads, I tried that um, and have had a limited amount of success. And I think it's because I don't really, I treat it, most of what I do on Threads is mocking Threads and mocking people for using Threads. And for whatever reason, it seems to be, people seem to like it. So that's really my only social media presence where I'm active. And I've got, I don't know, like almost 3,500 followers, I think, just sort of by accident. I don't know how it happened. So some of the attention I've gotten is from that. I've also appeared on a couple of other podcasts where I've talked. And then I have some people who have followed me because I've done a couple of other podcasts not related to Post Meridium. I have a podcast called Mayhem that is a sci-fi satire black comedy that people were that had some traction, and so that carried forward a little bit. But that's sort of the extent of it. I'm not a good self-promoter. It makes me vaguely nauseous. So and I can't really afford to hire anybody to do it for me. So I don't think it I think it's just as important, like whether you're successful with a book is just as important to me as how you're successful with a book. So the transparent marketing ploys, I find, I mean, people got to do what they got to do, right? If they're trying to sell a book, I just know that I can't do that. So the things that I'm doing, like appearing here, promotions, giveaways, and just allowing people access to my brain and what it would be like if you wanted to read the book, plus the free podcast version, is about what I'm willing, to do. I've sold 50 or 60 copies at this point in a couple months. I've gotten a handful of reviews. People have contacted me directly, told me it really meant something to them, elaborated on what that means, what they got out of it. And some of them I felt a sense of relief because I thought, good, they understood. Like they're taking from it what I hoped they would. And I didn't have any illusions that this was going to make me a millionaire or turn me into Stephen King.
Of course.
That was the point. Is here's how I experienced this story. Here's how I saw it. Maybe you'll see it. Maybe you'll understand my point of view and my worldview a little bit better. Or maybe you'll think it's exactly the wrong way to treat the situation. But I don't know. Too much today, I feel like people are interested in art that shares their worldview. Um, you know, preaching to the choir, or you're part of the choir and you want someone to tell you what you already think to agree with you.
Yeah.
And I just don't feel like you learn anything that way.
No.
And so even if every time I read or listen or watch some piece of art that I find myself vehemently disagreeing with, I enjoy that because now I understand more clearly what it is that I think. And so, I mean, genuinely, whether people love it or hate it, I don't know. I don't think I would have an emotional reaction to either, because I wouldn't get upset about that because I don't know enough about what else they like to know how valuable their opinion is, whether it's good or bad.
Well, we're recording this right now in October of 2023, and you released the book in September of 2023, and you've sold 50 copies. I would say that's pretty good.
It's better than I'd hoped. I mean, your highest aspirations are, well, that's going to be this rare one. I'm going to sell 100,000 copies in 2 months. But I was hoping really that someone who I didn't already know would buy it. Right. To crack that, there's like there's a barrier to entry. They don't know you. They're not friends or family, which is like that kind of goes without saying. And most of my purchases are complete strangers who found me on Threads or on the other podcasts I've been on. And that's a much better feeling. So
yes,
I've already gotten there. And so now my hopes are a little bit higher that something might crack and I might reach a larger audience at some point.
Okay. Are there any plans of writing another book, maybe even getting into fiction? Is that something that's crossed your mind?
Yes and yes. I'm actually in progress on. I had an idea, sort of based on the last 2 years of my life, as I'm working on it now. It's I would say a spiritual sequel to Post Meridium, but it's also fiction. So I think it's closer to what you were talking about with your own story, where the backbone was something that actually happened to you and then you fictionalized it. But it's yeah. So the thing I'm working on now we'll share some DNA with Post Meridium, but will be a very different experience.
Sounds really good. Sounds great.
Thank you, sir.
Do you have a website?
I do sort of, but yes, you can go to wetworkmedia.com, and there is a whole Post Meridium section there. You can find my link tree with all of the various links. And Post Meridium, for the next 90 days, or probably beyond, is available exclusively on Kindle and Kindle Unlimited. So it can be gotten there. And then the podcast audiobook can be heard anywhere that you hear podcasts.
Okay. Well, I'll make sure to put all those links in the description below so people could check all those links out.
I appreciate it, sir.
Any final words on what you want to say to the audience?
Keep a good head and always carry a light bulb. No, I hope they read the book or listen to it. I have no plans to make the podcast not free at any point and start selling it. So it'll always be there and always be free. And people like my voice. So you can spend 7.5 hours listening to one of the hardest periods of my life. Well, totally free.
Well, you have a very nice voice, and I think I would like to listen to your story. And I think I will definitely check that out myself. Sounds like a fascinating story.
Thank you, sir. I hope you enjoy.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Dan, and I wish you all the success in the future.
Thank you so much for your time, John.
You bet. Take care.
All right. Bye.
Thank you for watching. And before you go, If you like what I do here on Tell Me About Your Book, then consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and don't forget to ring that bell for future notifications. You can even leave a comment. All of that really helps in recommending this channel to a larger audience. And if you are an author, I would love to speak with you about your book. Until next time, keep on writing and be kind to one another.